Hello and welcome. Who are the Roma people and why is the French president so focused on them? The controversial decision to clear out hundreds of illegal Roma camps has revived the debate on this traditional community of wanderers. They are a distinct ethnic group living across Europe and are often called gypsies, but the Romani or Roma trace their origins to the Indian subcontinent. By the 14th century, the Roma presence in Europe was well documented, but in spite of this historic connection, the community has faced widespread discrimination, forced assimilation, and at times even ethnic cleansing. More recently, Italy declared its Romani population a, quote, national security risk, and other European countries have taken steps to expel them. So on today's show, we ask, are European nations being racist towards their Roma population, or do they have a genuine security concern? You can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Send an SMS or an email, and we'll take your phone calls onto the show as well. Well, joining me from Paris is Pierre Chopinot, a member of La Voix de Rome, or the Voice of the Roma, an organization which works to combat anti-Roma racism in France. From New York, we have Rob Cushion, Executive Director of the European Roma Rights Center, an organization that also works to combat racism and human rights abuses targeting the Romani people. But before we get to our guests, we're joined on the phone by Jacques Méhard, a member of the French National Assembly. Mr. Méhard represents President Sarkozy's Union for a Popular Movement party and approves of the plan to deport the Roma. Monsieur Méhard, thank you very much for joining us on the show. I want to start off by asking you why the focus on the Roma people now, and how do you answer those who say it's racial discrimination by targeting 500,000 Roma living legally in France?
I will revoke the term of, let's say, racism or discrimination. We are facing a genuine problem in Europe. I was the one who have been an advocate of the entering of Romania and Bulgaria into the European Union. And in the agreement to those two countries between the European Union, it was clearly said that we had an 8-year period of people could not travel freely if they are not, they don't have a labor contract, you know. So I think that we are facing a genuine, let's say, basic problem in the Union, which is the free movement inside the Union. I do believe that, in fact, this principle, as Mr. Prodi, who was the former Italian chairman of the Commission, will be one day or the other put into question. I think that we are facing a genuine challenge in Europe towards this nation, because those people are either Romanians or Bulgarians, and they have, as you said in your presentation, this kind of travel habit throughout the countries and never settle down.
Okay.
It means, in fact, that it is very difficult in our urban society, like France, like Germany, to have people traveling around who are in generally very poor. And, you know, it is not a genuine question of security, but it is a genuine social problem.
Okay, sir. So let me ask you one thing. I understand in France the Besson law states that if there's a town of more than 5,000 people, the town is required to set aside land so that travelers can create a small settlement. Now, I gather that's something that is very rarely done, which is why many of these travelers use land perhaps illegally and get into a lot of trouble. Surely that's something the government should be addressing, the fact that there is a law allowing these people to settle.
Well, first of all, no, I'm not. I'm sorry to say the Rome question is not something which is legally in France, because in fact they travel without any labor permission. You know, they in fact travel freely because our frontiers, our you know, borderlines in Europe between the states are very you know, that you can go through very easily. So in fact, the Rome question is a bit particular toward the agreement we have signed with Romania and Bulgaria. So we have another problem in France, which is, of course, the zone specified for those who travel, who are the people of traveling in France. They are French citizens and they have a right to settle down. But for the Rome, it is a bit different. They don't have a legal right as such. It's more a genuine social and a genuine challenge in the European Union than any security item.
Sir?
I would say it will be very difficult to solve, because even in Romania, at the time of the dictatorship, it has been very difficult to settle down and to sententize them, you know.
Sir, a quick thought then, before I let you go. What sort of reaction is there among the French population? What is it doing to the society, considering it's quite a large population in France, the Roma population? What is it doing in terms of, dividing society?
No, in fact, the Rome, it's not, it's a challenge. It is well known that when they come to a place, sometimes there are burglaries and things like that. The point is that the people don't agree to have such, people traveling around freely and settling down everywhere. It is true that we may have, let's say, rejection of those people by the French nation, as it has been done in Germany, in Italy, and so on. So I think this is something we should solve at the European level, to have a good policy to settle those people down. Because I think it will be very difficult to admit that in a urban society like our European states are today, that we could have, let's say, total free movement of population like that, as it used to be, I'm sorry to say, in the Middle Ages. I think that it's out of control, and it will be very difficult to have people admitted.
Jacques Maille, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. I appreciate your input into the show. Thank you for being on the phone with us.
Bon, allez, on y va, ma fille.
Thank you. Right, now, let's get to our guests. And Pierre Chopinot, if I could start with you first. You heard what our member of the Assembly there had to say, and I wonder, in your opinion, how you react, first of all, to his various points about the difficulties that are being created, but also, why do you think the French government, particularly President Sarkozy, is focused on the Roma people right now?
There were a lot of things that are said now. I think the words of the President Sarkozy were mainly an ideological intervention, trying to focus the problem on Roma and traveling people situation, and making a confusion among those two groups, and constituting somehow an ethnic target to his policy.
Do you feel it's a distraction, considering all the other problems he has? Do you think this is a way to distract the French people from all the other issues, such as the economy?
I think it is right now, because we are in a bad political context in France, with financial affairs, economical crisis, and I think it's a kind of distraction, but it also is there is a real policy of repression against Roma people in France, which is not new, and but this declaration, I think, is mainly on an ideological level.
Let me bring in Rob Cushion here and ask for your opinion on what our guests have had to say so far, and get your take on why there's a focus on the Roma people now. What impact will it have on the way those communities are living in France and around Europe now?
Let me just set a little bit of historical context for you and your viewers. Yesterday was a very grim anniversary for Roma. On August 2nd, 1944, the Nazis took approximately 3,000 Roma who had been interred in Auschwitz and executed them. The total number of Roma is estimated somewhere around 650,000 or more who were killed by the Nazis, in addition to 6 million Jews who were exterminated as well. Now, the last time the government of France engaged in mass deportation based on ethnicity, tens of thousands of Jews were deported from France and executed. Now, I'm not suggesting this is France's intention today, but elsewhere in Europe, we see extremist, racist politicians calling for a final solution to the gypsy problem. We see racist murders and other violent attacks which are going unpunished in Hungary, in Italy, in Turkey, throughout the region. And so when the government chooses to target a particular group based on ethnicity, in the case of the Roma who are coming from outside, or arguably based on lifestyle, if you want to draw a difference to the French nationals, the gens de voyage. This encourages further discrimination and violence.
Okay,
and
Rob,
so we hope that
sorry, I want to read something to you actually, because the European Union has pumped quite a bit of money into trying to assimilate the Roma, to bring them into the mainstream, but they also seem to leave it to individual countries to decide on how to treat them. Just last week, the European Commission looked at what France was doing, and this is part of what it said. It said, "We are not here as the European Commission to judge on individual cases of Roma people. It's for each government, each authority to make those decisions." Now, I know you're not that happy with the French approach, because as Europeans you believe, I think, that the Roma have a right to work in any EU country. So how do you take this statement from the Commission's spokesperson for justice and human rights?
If I might address that, and also address the comments of our member of parliament from France, who basically seemed to suggest that the EU freedom of movement right is not such a good right, and maybe Europe should reconsider the whole thing. I mean, that's what the government of France is talking about doing. What the European Commission said is that you cannot expel people who are EU citizens from another EU member state, except on an individualized case-by-case basis, where you look at an individual, you determine if there's a security issue or an issue of crime. You make a judgment in your criminal justice system if that person is guilty of a crime or not, and then you make a decision as to whether or not that crime justifies expulsion, because EU law does not allow you to expel even people who have committed crimes unless an individual determination is made that this is a proportionate response.
Okay.
So that's what the Commission is saying, but that's not what the French government has announced.
Well, I'm going to get back to you and Pierre Chopinot in just a minute. We have to take a short break here. When we come back, how much of the Roma issue is driven by politics and the flagging economy? We'll get a perspective on that too. Don't go away. Welcome back. Is French President Sarkozy looking to crack down on crime by deporting Roma communities, or simply attempting to shift public attention away from the country's political and economic troubles? There are about 10 million Roma settled in the European Union. Of those, France is officially home to about 500,000, and it's believed that an additional 20,000 may reside in the country illegally. Well, throughout their history in Europe, the Roma have been subjected to discrimination, forced assimilation, even ethnic cleansing. So what's really at work this time? My guests are Pierre Chopinot, a member of La Voix de Rome, the voice of the Roma, and it's an organization which works to combat anti-Roma racism in France, and Rob Cushion, executive director of the European Roma Rights Centre. Now, as we get back to our discussion, it's interesting to look at some of the numbers which indicate that there are only an estimated 20,000 Roma illegally living in France. Pierre, in the case of this number of people living illegally, why is there so much focus on this particular group, and what effort is made to try to bring them into the mainstream? I mean, there's a big negative stereotyping of the Roma people, and I wonder how much of that is at fault.
First of all, they are not in France illegally. They are allowed as a European citizen to stay 3 months in France. And they could stay longer on a legal way if they could find a job. But to find a job, they can't find a job because they're under transitional treatment that make them very difficult to access to the
Pierre, when
activity.
But Pierre, when there are crimes, now of course it's not just the Roma community, but in the case of the Roma, which are being focused or targeted, when there are crimes, when there are incidents like when there was, I think in Saint-Agnan in the Loire Valley, there was rioting in the streets and burning of cars, and how can the Roma leadership take some kind of responsibility to stop that happening and therefore avoid making the Roma people a negative focus?
Yeah, okay. But I would like to remember that in Saint-Agnan, it started with a young Manouche or Roma guy that was shot by the police. We don't know until now the circumstances in which it happened, but only the justice can clarify it. And then his cousins just protest burning cars, and to count them, only their parents and people from the community can do it. But immediately after this event, the President Sarkozy had those words, very violent, declaring war against the community, and not having any word for the families and for the young man who is dead now.
So it was very biased. Yeah.
There is an.
Yeah, well, let me get Rob Cushion's perspective on this, because we had an email that came in from South Africa, and if I could put this to you, Rob, it says, Sarkozy's administration failed the people of France, and what he is doing now is purely politics and xenophobia. Now, I know that President Sarkozy is not known for having a diplomatic tongue, and he's called the rioters on the streets in the past scum before. He's calling the Roma people now criminals. What impact do you think that's having on the French public? Is it rallying them towards him because he's looking for the kind of hard right population to back him, or is it creating divisions?
Well, I'm not a student of French politics, so I probably defer to my colleague in France on that one. But the question of whether this has become politicized, I think clearly it has. First of all, starting with a problem among French nationals that was precipitated by the police killing of a young Frenchman who happened to be a traveler. Followed by some rioting, followed by a declaration that not only were these French nationals a problem, but also all these Roma who come from elsewhere, they're a problem too. And now most recently what we see from the President of France is declarations concerning French citizens who were not born in France, and suggesting that they are also a source of criminal activity, and he has threatened that they might be stripped of their citizenship as a result. So there's clearly a political angle to this, but again, not being a resident of France, I won't say more about it.
Okay. Pierre, let me ask you if there is a genuine desire among the Roma population to be assimilated, to be part of the community, to get jobs and settle, or is there a preference to be outside society?
Those 500,000 of French Roma consider themselves as French people, and they're fed up to be considered somehow as internal foreigners, and that's what is going on right now. And most of those, like 20,000 Roma coming from Eastern Europe since the last 20 years, also desire to enter the French society, to find a job and to live there. They left their country because they couldn't live in there, and they go back there. They move not because they're nomad, because most of them aren't nomad. They move to migrate here in France and try to find a job and to learn French and to send the children at school.
So Pierre, when you hear, we had an email I want to put to you that came in from a viewer by called Marcus Schlegel. When you hear this kind of comment, let me get your reaction. Marcus wrote in saying, "It is difficult to find the right place for these groups. I would rather not be their neighbor." When you hear that kind of thing, how do you react?
Oh, I think it comes from ignorance and fear. And by the way, how President Sarkozy right now is to work on that fear and develop it and hate between the people. I mean, I don't know. I feel sad to hear it, but it's mainly ignorance and people that doesn't want to meet each other or talk with their neighbors. I don't know.
Okay, let's get a caller in from Prague. We have Panos, who's been waiting on the line patiently. Panos, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Riz. I'm a big fan of your show.
Very kind, thank you.
I just wonder, isn't it a little bit disingenuous and also counterproductive to draw comparisons with the Holocaust and deportations of Jews during World War II and today, or even with the killings of Roma people by Hitler's regime? I think it actually might detract from the argument and reinforce prejudice against Roma by making such, in my opinion, fantastic comparisons. Because as was said, the French government doesn't have an intention to go deport and have killed these Roma people.
All right. Rob Cushion, there's an interesting point made by Panos there. Let me get your reaction, please.
Sure. Well, of course, that was a bit of maybe a rhetorical flourish on my part, but there is a serious undertone here which we have to keep in mind. When the Interior Minister of Italy suggested that it was understandable that people would be enraged against Roma and might want to attack their settlements. Several days later, a mob of people did just that and attacked Roma settlement and drove people out of their homes. So there is a very real link between what politicians say and the actions, violent actions of people on the ground. So even though it may not be the intention of the government of France to launch another genocide against the Roma people, political words have real consequences. And unfortunately, throughout Europe, we see that there has been no political price paid by any political figure for anti-Roma hate speech.
Okay.
And we hear the comments from Romania, from France, from Hungary, from Slovakia, from Italy, throughout the region, politicians making anti-Roma statements, and there is simply no reaction. And that encourages violence.
I'm going to just read, Rob, to you an email from Pakistan from Syed Ali Nasser Zaidi, who says, if France claims to be a fountainhead of democracy, it had better choose a path of accommodation by naturalizing Roma diaspora populations. Just literally 15 seconds, do they have the right to get naturalized? Do they have the right to get citizenship?
Well, the EU citizens from Bulgaria and Romania, as far as I know, do not presently enjoy the right of citizenship. They would have to establish certain ties in France and go through a process. Okay. What they do have is the right to move, and a limited right so far, but okay, in theory, a right to work.
Rob, I have to stop you there. And Pierre, I have to thank you as well for taking part in this debate. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, and thanks for being with us too. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook, see what we're up to there, and catch previous programs to post your questions and comments we can share with our guests and fellow viewers. On the next show, hovering on the brink, the filmmaker of the new documentary Countdown to Zero explains why he thinks the world may be a lot closer to nuclear disaster than we think. Make sure you tune in for that from me and the team. We'll see you next time.